Hi, I'm Dr. Chuck Betters. There's probably no more controversial topic amongst Christians as that of the style of worship that their churches use. Someone writes this question to me, says, I attend a pretty contemporary style church. The sermons are wonderful and their worship time is like a concert, but sometimes I feel like I'm the only one singing along out of duty instead of out of joy. Is it wrong to just go through the motions of worship? Well, worship is an act by which we present our bodies, according to Romans 12:1, as living sacrifices that are holy and acceptable unto God. And Paul calls that our reasonable spiritual worship. You know, the New Testament, the people were used to sacrifices. They would kill animals and offer the animals as dead sacrifices. But now Paul calls the new era, the era of the Christian, as one of a living sacrifice. Our bodies are to be presented as living sacrifices. Well, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that there's a vast difference between having convictions and preferences. And in worship, many churches adopt different preferences. They have different styles of worship. Some are more contemporary than others. Some are more upbeat than others. When I first entered the ministry, we had a piano, an organ, and we sang hymns out of the hymnal. That was it. Every Sunday, the same thing. Great hymns of the faith, a piano, and an organ. Well, our sons at the time were trying to start a band. And I can't tell you how much I hated their music. Their music was horrible to me personally, but I was watching them develop their skills. I was watching them learn how to use their skills, musical skills, in ways that were stretching them. Well, the topic eventually came to, well, Dad, we want to use our skills in church. Well, one of our kids played the drums, and he wanted to play his drums in church. And my first response was, nope, we're not going to do that because that's not what we do here. And he raised a question to me that I thought was so profound that I had to give in. He said, well, if I can't play my drums in church, where can I play them? And of course, the options for a young teenage boy to play his drums outside of the church, well, that wasn't too much of a selection for me. That was something that I looked at and thought, well, I have to answer that question. If he can't play his drums in church, where can he play them? Well, I allowed him to do just that. And when he first presented as a percussionist, he was pretty good. He had skills, his brother had skills, his other brother had skills, and they were putting those skills together to present a style of worship in church that caused some people in the church to raise their eyebrows. In fact, some of them even left the church over this. They were so convicted that that music was wrong that they left the church. They called it convictions. One person actually used the expression of certain hymns were inspired by God in the same way that Scripture was inspired by God. Well, that certainly is not biblical. It's certainly not theologically correct. And so we allowed them to play their instruments in church with a different style of music, much of which I didn't like. I personally did not like some of the songs that they were playing. Even today, as I listen to a contemporary service, I am sometimes moved to say, well, where are the old hymns? And yet, when we talk about what kind of worship we are to present to God, he speaks of it as a living sacrifice, which means, in my mind, not all of the music I enjoy is going to be played in church, and not all the music that I despise is something that other people aren't going to enjoy. And so there are times in which I just close my mouth, I close my responses, my negative responses, and I just listen to the people around me singing. And I hear in them joy, and I am blessed by the joy that they are expressing to God in their worship. Meaning, very simply, I have to learn and had to learn the difference between personal convictions that to violate those convictions would be sinful, or personal preferences. And to violate those preferences is not sinful, because not everybody likes the same music. You'll find people today who like country music. Some people despise country music, and on and on and on the list goes. So what I have learned is that there is a style of worship that you will enjoy, but there's also other styles of worship you may not enjoy, but for the benefit of those around you, you can enter into their praise, enter into their worship by just closing your mouth and listening to the joy of the Spirit coming out of them. So worship is a corporate event. When we are gathered together on a Sunday morning, we are listening to others use their gifts and their talents and their abilities for the glory of God. Now, one of the side effects, one of the side benefits of allowing those three young boys, to use their gifts and talents in ways that hadn't been used before in the church was that instrumentalists and musicians and singers started coming out of the woodwork. Folks were looking at them using their gifts and thinking, well, I could use my gifts as well. Up to that point, they thought, well, if I don't play a piano or play an organ, I can't use my gifts. And on it went for several years until our church developed arguably one of the best music programs around. There are many, many talented people now that are using their gifts, talents, and abilities because one boy came up to me and said, why can't I play my instrument in church? If I can't play it there, where can I play it? And so I think to answer your specific question, I think it is wrong for you to turn off in worship simply because you don't like the contemporary style or you don't like the concert feel. I do think that there are some churches that go overboard. I think when we start doing things that are sensational just for the sake of being sensational, I think that we lose something in worship. There is a sacredness to worship. There is a profound sacredness to what we are doing on a Sunday morning when we sing our praises to God. And so to approach it lightly or to approach it in a performance sort of way, I think violates the spirit of Romans 12:1. So there are churches, I do believe, that go overboard. They use all kinds of devices and paraphernalia and accessories and everything else to what they would think enhances worship, but some others would look at it and say, well, all we're trying to do is be just like the world. And there's something to be said about that. So looking for that balance, striking that balance of accepting the blessedness of the ancient past and looking forward to the creativity of the future, I think is one of the great, great benefits of bringing people who are talented to the forefront and saying, go ahead and create that music. When you study church history and when you study the history of the music in the church, historically for hundreds of years, every single generation was on the cutting edge. And they always had to come to the point of looking back and saying, well, that music just doesn't touch me anymore. And so the creativeness of the church in bringing about new music for a new generation is something that cycles again and again and again and again. And we have to allow our young people the creative license to develop new music and new styles, and not just simply hold on to the past, but also without discarding the past. So a blended style of worship is my personal preference. I think there is something to be said about the old hymns, but there's also something to be said about the new, what I like to call creative genius of this generation. And so we offer ourselves in worship as living sacrifices that are pleasing to God. I hope this helps.